Hello, I am G Fuel Man. And I thought we would just do a little sit down and talk a little bit about some cards. About some wonderful cards. So, obviously, we are approaching set 3. It's coming out next month. And I've been playing a little bit online, experimenting a little bit with set 3 and set 4 as well. But I thought for us English-speaking goons, we might sit down and take a look at some of these cards together and have a look at what's on the horizon. And in particular, I do want to look at the yellow variety of cards. So let's take a look. Look at this sweet move we got right here. We're just going to go through one by one and talk a little bit about what's on offer this set, really. We will also go through both variety of starter deck. So I will talk about the Yamato starter deck, which is coming later in the set, as well as the starter deck 7, Big Mom, Charlotte Lin, not Anna Lin. And I think for me it makes a little bit more sense if I start. For me, it makes a little bit more sense if I start with this Big Mom and talk about this one. Because this is the one that I'm actually playing and I'm actually fooling around with. So I think this is... I think there are some interesting things to talk about with the other Big Mom, but I'd like to discuss a little bit of this lady first. And go through some of her starter deck pieces. Alright, so... obviously, this is Charlotte Lin, alright? So she is a 5-life yellow leader, obviously. And her skill is Don 2. While you're attacking, you can add 1 card from the top or bottom of your life to your hand, right? And there's a second component, right? If you do this, and your life is at 2 or less, then you may place the top card... you may place, 1 card from your hand on top of your life, right? So... this sort of encompasses... The reason I want to talk about this card first is because this card really sort of encompasses everything that's actually interesting about yellow. So everything that's interesting that yellow can do that feels... and like, I'm a big control guy. I like to play a very reactive game style. I like to set things up and watch them pay off later. And there aren't a lot of... there aren't a lot of things in the game quite as interesting as this for that sort of idea. Of course, it is attached to... so obviously this comes in the form of trigger effects. You set your life up, right? So you hit the right triggers at the right times. The only thing being that you can only use this from 3 life, right? So it says 2 or less life, but the action of taking a card from your life happens first. Then it checks your life total. Is it 2 or less? Well, now it is. So now you can put a card back. Now, this does say you can take top or bottom, which is pretty standard in this game. And there is a way to check the top card of your life. But in my opinion, I think you always feel pretty mad if you pull the top card of your life and you're like, oh my god, that is the card that I want to put back down on my life. So I take from the bottom. It doesn't feel as bad to just put that back on top if that's the card you wanted to put on top anyway. But yeah, for me, this is really where all the interest in yellow is right now. So this is the sort of leader that I'm playing and experimenting a lot of. And it does... and yeah, and again, it's all centered around these trigger effects, which we may as well take a look at. Every set's got to have one. Charlotte Anna, 1 costs 3k. Every starter deck's going to have one. Every set's going to have one. Katakuri, I don't see a lot of this guy. This is a 4 cost 6k. He's got no counter power on him. A lot of these cards that don't have counter power on. The thing about them is that they need... if you have a card that has no counter on it, you are assuming this is a card that you units, right? This is a card that you're going to play like every single time you see it. Right? Because if you aren't playing cards that don't have counter power, they literally don't do anything. They are a complete brick in your hand. So I don't know what kind of decks we're running this in right now. It does use that sort of Katakuri effect of checking the top life of your opponent. It can check your own life. But I think it's much more useful checking your opponent. Unless you know every single card in your opponent's life already, you've gone through, checked every single one. It's always going to be more valuable to check the top card of your opponent. Is it Gum Gum Jet Pistol? It is. Put it to the bottom. And then if you have less life cards than your opponent, he gains Rush, right? So ultimately, you're going to want to use an effect like this when you're behind, which is not a hard thing to accomplish. It's not a hard thing to accomplish in yellow. These big mom leaders do want to sit at quite low life in order to use their effects. And even the Yamato leader is quite comfortable sitting at 2 life. So it's not unrealistic to say that you're going to be sitting at less life than your opponent. But to get Rush on a 6k body for a cost of 4... I mean, like, it's on par with that kind of, like, Zoro idea in red. But I think the 4 slot in particular is an extremely competitive slot in yellow, and not having counter power is going to hold this guy back a lot. So I've seen it come out earlier today online, but I'm not seeing a lot of use on this guy in general, and I don't really look at what's being played overseas. A lot of these English metas end up having a little differences here and there. I don't know if this guy's that good. Charlotte Snack, 5 cost 6k, another unit I don't see a lot of. So it's Don 1 while attacking, add the top or bottom card of your life area to your hand. He gains Banish and +1. Alright, so he's going to be swinging for 8 with 1 Don. Ripping 1 life, having Banish. Obviously that Banish... This Banish keyword is pretty fucking strong, right? So we love seeing Banish. The thing to think about is... what kind of list are you running this in? Again, this guy's got no counter power, which I didn't realize at first. I do think there is... I mean, ripping a card from the top of your life and not healing that back, like what Daifuku does, which we'll talk about when he comes up. Like it feels really bad to cop a life so that you can deal 1 to your opponent Banish. Unless you have like a pretty reliable way to heal yourself following on from that, right? So I am experimenting with units like this guy, and there's another one in particular that's in the main set with not like this big mom leader, right? More with actually this big mom leader. I think there's an interesting deck here that I think I'll talk about more when I get to big mom, right? But I'm not like super hot on this guy. But I think there's an interesting deck that is a very difficult deck to play. And also, so playing the thing about odds, right? So cards that are odds are always going to be played on the same turn, right? So a card that costs 1 will always be able to, you'll always be able to play turn 1. A card that costs 3, you'll always be able to play turn 3. So this guy, turn 2. This guy will always be playable on turn 3 by virtue of being a 5 cost. But, like, but he's not attacking that turn, right? So he's always attacking on turn 4. So you can be swung 2 times. You can be swung consistently 2 times, dealt 2 damage, possibly more, and then ripping that extra life once. Like at 6, it's got a bit of sticking power, but you know, if this was a 4 cost 5k that had the same effect, I think it's a way better card. Or even then, maybe if it was a 3 cost like 4k Don 1, right? Rip a life, you know, there's a more interesting card there without the counter power. But at 5, it really limits this guy's usability. Now, for the workhorse of yellow, in my opinion, Charlotte Daifuku. A lot of these cards that don't have like on-play effects, you know, this is what we're talking about. This guy, he's an on-attack effect. This guy's got an on-play, but these 2 guys have on-attack effects, right? The difference between these guys, this guy's a 4 for 5, and he does have a pretty strong effect, right? Don 1 while attacking, take the top or bottom card of your life, add it to your hand, place the top card of your deck onto your life. This guy is effectively draw 1 card for 1 Don every time you attack. If this guy can stick for a couple of turns, you're extremely happy. However, you don't want to go firsts with this guy. Because playing this guy on turn 2 is really good. Playing this guy on turn 3, attacking on turn 4, is really bad. So we want to see this guy on turn 2. We want to start it. So on our first swing, we want to play this guy. On our second swing, we want to be swinging with this guy. Alright? And then, like, he is a removable body at his cost and at his power point for certain matchups. But if you play this guy on turn 2 and then your opponent's turn 2, they bomb you with like jet pistol or something, you're not that upset, to be honest. It's a pretty even trade. And into red, if they've had to spend their whole turn removing a guy like this, and you can just counter and protect your life that turn and play something else the following turn, you're happy to stall out against red so you can get a better chance getting to some of your bigger units. A big problem with these decks that run big boss monsters into red is that you drop your big boss monster, the effect goes off, and then you immediately lose the game because they got too much shit on the board, and so if they have to wait, so whatever deck you're playing against, yellow's got a really powerful late game, so if they have to spend a turn removing this guy, you are pretty happy, and he does have counter power unlike this guy, so he's never a brick, right? So as far as like a guy that doesn't have like an on-play effect, it's an on-attack effect, Daifuku's got mad stocks with me. I think this is a really good card. I'm always happy to play it. Flampe, 2 for 4. There's always got to be one. Charlotte Brûlée. Now this is funny because we have this exact card in the game already. It exists in blue. It's in the Boa Hancock trigger 3-cost blocker. In 90% of decks, this is a terrible card. Like you pull it off the trigger and you're hey. Here's the thing about triggers in this game. The thing about triggers in this game is that they are extremely frustrating to play against, but you're so happy when you see them. But there's no way to predict a trigger's going to happen. I mean, you can run a high trigger count and look at all my triggers, right? But if your only triggers is a card like this, like the amount of games you're going to see it come out and really make a difference, I think you'd rather just run a 1 or a 2-cost blocker and play it out. Sometimes you'd even rather just play 3 and get a blocker out. It is a significantly weaker blocker than what you usually get. At 1, it is relevant in some situations. Obviously, like the Big Shanks doesn't get run anymore. But like, if Big Shanks ever was a factor, right? Like, you wouldn't want a blocker with only 1,000 on it. But in a game where you don't normally play around triggers, a card like this, a card like that Boa Hancock, suddenly becomes really good, right? Because you can use this effect. You can use this effect to set things up. And this is the first example we have in this deck of a card we can set up ahead of time. From that 3 life, we know we gotta like survive out a turn. We set this guy up. We set this guy up, you take a hit, you play a blocker, you block the next hit. You know you're about to take 2 hits, you can't really defend against them. Alright, instead you can spend 2 mana to set it up. You spend 2 on your leader effect to set it up. You're still being quite aggressive because you're swinging for 7, and 7 is a really aggressive swing, and it's really annoying to block out a 7. Then you set up a blocker. Sometimes you generally expect you're going to take a hit a turn anyway, so you take a hit, then you play out this guy. You're able to be offensive and defensive at the same time by having this here, unless they have a way to crit that life away. This trigger, this unit, suddenly becomes really good and really playable. Whether or not you run it in your deck, hey, that's up to you. But I run it in some of my decks, specifically my Big Mom deck, right? And it actually makes sense. Charlotte Pudding, this is a 2k. Now this is like your generic 2k of the deck, and it does see a bit of play. It has one quite unsatisfactory interaction with the searcher for yellow. There's a searcher for yellow that can't find puddings. So you can't search this card out in yellow, whereas you can search out like this and this and this and all this shit, right? Anything Big Mom Pirates. This is a non-searchable card, which is a shame because it is a 2k counter, but we do have 2 other 2k counters in yellow that are searchable, so it's not a big deal. I do run this because 2Ks are kind of just filler in a lot of decks. You don't generally need all 50 slots when you're building a deck. It gets a little tougher with like multicolor decks, but generally you don't need all 50 slots. All right, so you can comfortably spend like 12 slots in a lot of in a lot of decks just on 2Ks. This is an on-play effect, right? Spend 2, look at the top card of your life or your opponent's life. Top or bottom, right? Yeah, is it top or bottom or just top? Yeah, it's just top. So you can check the top card. So, like, if you're really worried about a jet pistol, you can play this out, or like a red hawk or whatever. Those are the 2 I mainly go to, because I know we've all been in that situation where we punch red with our leader first, and then they trigger bomb something on our field, and we're just hella mad about it. But this guy, like, if you are particularly worried about that, you're trying to scout that thing out, you can spend 2 just to check if that's there and put him at the bottom of their life, right? You can also play it to check your own life to see if you've got a trigger coming or something like that, and maybe if you have a pretty good trigger that you don't need right now, like if you found like a brulee on top of your life and it's not really necessary early in the game, it's just gonna get bombed by like a V-Star or something like that, you might want to just pop that on bottom. But I was playing this a bit when I first started playing the Big Mom starter yellow. I've sort of just defaulted to just using this as a 2K camera though. I don't think it's that necessary to play. Mont d'Or, I have not played this guy. He does have the trigger effect of, and there are a few units that actually have this exact same effect. Trigger, trash a card from hand, you get to play this guy. So if you find this guy on top of your life, you can remove a card from hand and play him, which it is a bit expensive to discard in this game. But, like, specifically for attackers, not so much a unit like this, and I'll explain what he does in a second. Specifically for units that attack, an effect like this can be quite good. Because, yeah, you might have to trash a card, but your opponent's probably going to have to trash a card also to defend against its attacks that are coming, right? Especially if it's quite a powerful attack, or, you know, there's a double striker that we're going to talk about later on, right? But this guy's a little bit different. This guy's activate main. You may rest this character and add the top or bottom card from your life to your hand, and then KO one of your opponent's 3 or less. Again, with this, like, rip your own life, KO a unit type stuff. So the card comes to your hand, which is nice. There's another one that trashes it, but the card comes to your hand, and then you get to KO a 3 or less. It doesn't have a huge amount of range. For 3, though, there aren't a lot of cards in this game that are like come in for 4 power, KO a 4 power card that's on a body, right? This guy is KOing a 3 or less on a body, but it is making you rip a life. Like Kobe makes you discard a card, right? This guy's making you discard a card to play it and then rip a life again. So this guy is effectively costing you 2 life in order to use his effect. So again, I think this is extremely expensive as far as a card goes. And I don't think he really deserves a lot of play. But I think there's a potentially interesting not so good deck again in the not so good leader. Because, you know, this chick has a way to heal herself. But we'll talk more about that later, alright? But I think there's an interesting, potentially an interesting deck here. Alright, the meat and potatoes of yellow for me. For me, this is... If there are 2 things yellow's about, it's this card's whole idea, right? And it's the life setting up triggers and stuff like that, right? So, because you have to set up triggers in yellow, it becomes quite expensive on your life, right? So, you can only expect... Right, with this Big Mom leader in the starter deck, you can only really expect to hit the trigger off your setup, right? Because you can't bank on hitting, you know, the first 2 triggers. But from 3 life, if you get to 3 life, you start setting your triggers from 3 life, you can expect to hit a trigger 3 times again. Which is alright, but you want to get more value out of something like that. So you need ways to heal yourself. So the meat and potatoes, really, this is where we get into the big boss monster stuff of yellow. On play, for 7, it's an 8k. Your opponent chooses one of the following effects. They can either trash one of their life, or they can opt to heal us 1 life. And if they heal us 1, right, say we're on 2 life, we go to 3 life, and we defend properly that turn, we can start the chain all over again. We can get an additional trigger that we weren't going to get initially. We can, you know, we can deal out another hit. If they choose to trash 1, that's a life card that doesn't go to their hand. It's effectively a banish. It's effectively an on-play banish 1, and they're a little bit closer to death, right? And hand control in this game is so extremely important. So the fact that this is trashing their life, not dealing a damage, is really good. But this is the meat and potatoes of what we're gonna, what's interesting about, in my opinion, what's actually interesting about yellow is cards like this and the life setting stuff. So it complements each other quite well, which I like. Now, here's some different stuff. I'm not seeing a lot of Zeus and stuff getting run, but I am running this card. So this guy's a 3 cost, 3k, 1000 power. Trigger play this guy. Thank God it's just trigger play this guy. You don't have to discard. It doesn't feel bad playing this guy. Activate main, you may rest this character. Give one of your Charlotte Linley, so leader or character, doesn't matter, they gain banish. Right? And there's another one. There's another one. Skip this fucking guy. 4 cost 6k, who cares? 3 cost 3, same, all the same, except activate main. Exactly the same effect, gain double attack. Right? A trigger, play this guy. So Prometheus and Zeus, we can sort of talk about in a similar context, right? I tried to delete that so it wouldn't get in the way. These guys, you can play them out for 3 and it's not that expensive. But in my mind, the big idea here is you want to play around this. Right? So you can swing with your leader. Your leader does swing for 7 and you can throw some really oppressive attacks early on. Like if the first damage that gets dealt to you, you find Zeus, oh cool, you know, whatever, it's free. You can just play him out anyway. At 3, you know, they're going to find ways to get rid of him. But you can pressure pretty early on with your leader. Just set this to banish, attach a couple dons, swing. A lot of people are just gonna like dump a whole bunch of cards to protect a banish. They just will. Especially if you got that double attack coming through as well. Like if you manage to get both of them. But I wouldn't bank on that. But what you can bank on is if you are running 4 of these guys and you can set up these guys effectively, you can play one out and you can set another one on your trigger, or you can set both of them on your trigger, take 2 hits, whatever. Then you play this, all right? And then you rest these, double attack, banish, all right? It doesn't cost you any don. It's all the setup. The first action you do this turn. Now this is an 8k banish with double attack, and you've got 9 open don, right? And you can do whatever you want. You can attach 9 don. You can throw some dummy swings with some other shit, right? Or you can swing this and then play another one, and just do it again the following turn. They probably have a hard time killing both of these guys on the following turn, but without a doubt they'll try and kill the banish. But it doesn't matter at that stage. There's so many games in set 2 where, like the Green Yamato Secret Rare, they play it out cheap with Kinemon. You don't have a blocker, you just concede. You don't have a blocker, they just attach a shitload of Don to this thing, swing you in the face. If you discard to protect yourself, you've got no resources to play the game anymore. If you take 2 hits, you're so close to death, and you've lost 2 resources. Right? So you can... I don't see a lot of people using this stuff, but I don't see a lot of people playing the Big Mom stuff. But that's really what you would do. And there's another Big Mom that you can use this exact same combo with, and you have more time to set it up. But if you can get it for the 7, I think it's way more valuable than waiting for the 10 that we're going to talk about later. 3 for 5, there's always got to be one. Alright. So, take this card, right? Right? Take this effect, cheapen it by 2, put it on an event, you got Soul Pocus, right? Soul Pocus is an interesting case study in my opinion. Why do I think Soul Pocus is an interesting case study? Because I think it's very reminiscent of a whole different pair of cards. And I don't have pictures prepared to talk about this. But why is this a really interesting card and a really playable card, but Sables is not quite? So if you want to think about Sables is a 4 cost, put a 7. They're completely different effects, right? Don't get me wrong. And they're in different colors. So they're completely different, all right? However, in design, they are similar in that this is an effect that is attached to a 7-cost unit. Alright? So the 7-cost unit gets you this effect. Right? And 5, you can get the same effect without the body. Right? Why would you ever play this card when you have it on the 7? Or would you run both? Whatever. Sables and Doflamingo are very similar in that respect. So Doflamingo is a 7-cost, bounce a guy back to hand, 7 or less. And Sables is a 4-cost, bounce a 7 back to hand, right? And Sables also has this exact same trigger effect. Activate this card's main effect, right? Sables, I've played a bit of blue and I've run Sables and I've tried to work around with Sables. Everyone's got a problem. The problem with Sables is that Sables is a serious brick of a card. And arguably Doflamingo can be a brick as well, but you spend 3 extra, you get the body as well as the effect, and it's a big tempo gain in blue. That's why Doflamingo has seen quite a bit of play, but something like Sables, you move a guy back to hand, like, it's cost you 4, it's pretty good, you know, he's spent 7, you've spent 4, you've set him back a turn, but he still has the 7, you don't have the 4, you don't have, like, a really powerful 3 play that turn. There's issues with playing Sables. It doesn't really, like, gain you that much tempo. You really need to already have an advantage to play a card like Sables, alright? But if you play Doflamingo, alright, you set back their tempo, and then you've established a pretty strong body, right? So, Sables is, despite being way cheaper, is really not as valuable a card as something like Doflamingo. Now, it's exactly the same here, right? And both of the, like, this card, you don't want to play this card. You don't feel good about playing this card, right? Unless you're so far ahead. Unless you're so far ahead, you've already got a really well-established board, you can just play this thing. You can just go, heal me or take 1, your choice. I've got bodies, right? So they probably have to heal you 1, right? So you become more defensive for a round, and you've already got a really big offense. That's when it's good. That's when Sables is good too. Now, they both have triggers, so you can pull Sables off the top of your life, bounce a guy. You can pull this off the top of your life and do that effect too, right? So, because you can put this card on your life at any time you like, and it has this trigger effect, and you can basically use it for 2 Don, right? You can use it for 2 Don, and that 2 Don doesn't even go to waste, because again, it's an attached to effect. It's an attached to effect. There's no cost here, right? You're swinging for 7, and 7's a really powerful hit. You're never that upset about swinging for 7. You're never upset about swinging for 7, unless you're playing against Whitebeard, I guess, right? But this pops off. This pops off. It was very cheap for you to use. You've been able to consistently activate this trigger. This card can easily become a 4 of, where something like Sables, which is in such a similar boat, right? And becomes really inconsistent and really unplayable compared to its body counterpart. And that's a problem that events just have in this game, right? An event has to be so much more powerful than the unit that has the exact same effect. Like, Sables would need to be a cheaper card in order to be a more valuable card. We now have a card that costs 2 more in blue, coming in set 4, but has a way more powerful effect. And now there's actually, and there's probably still argument around that as a card. And there is a lot of argument around these activate main effect cards, because it's the same exact problem I talk about when I want to talk about units like Snack. Snack is not some big late game threat. Snack is not winning you any games, right? When you see a card like this that has no counter power, you want to play it. Every time you see a card in your hand that has no counter power, you need to keep track. As a deck builder, you want to keep track of every time you've seen this card in your hand and thought, oh yeah, I'm going to play this right now. Oh, that's a great draw. I need to play this, right? Every time you see a card that has no counter power, you should be playing it, right? And because of this line that just says trigger and its combination with your leader effect, it eliminates that need for this counter line, because you can put this on your life. And arguably, this guy would be in the same boat if he was like discard 2, play this guy. Suddenly this could potentially be a way more playable card. But we don't know. Anyway, Soul Pocus, I really like Soul Pocus as far as the design goes and how it fits into this archetype. I think this is one of the best starter decks we've actually seen in terms of like thematics and stuff like that. So, bravo Bandai. Very nice. Power Mochi, look at one card from the top of your opponent's life and place it to the top or bottom of your opponent's life area. Then up to one of your leaders or characters gains +2 for the battles. It's a counter for 1 + 2. And you get to check the top of your life. I feel like my beef with this card, so like you can check your own life, see if you've got a trigger there, and then like you defend, and then you can put it top or bottom, right? So in my mind, if you know you're going to take one hit this turn, you can counter the first one with this. So like they swing you for 6, you counter with this, go to 7, check the top card of your life. Do I have a good counter here? I'm going to put it back and then take the next hit and then get that good counter or not. You can check your opponent's life, but it's not useful then and there. And like this card's namesake as well, I don't think has any interest in a card like this because he's already got this effect. Maybe the trigger itself is more interesting. Draw 1, look at 1 card, right? Draw 1 and then you get the effect. So the draw 1's pretty good. And then you get to like check your next one. So this is probably more interesting as a counter, but not so interesting as a counter that I want to start setting this up. So I think it's fine as far as like if you're just sitting at home playing starter deck games with friends, right? But I don't think I'm really running this card. Big Mama Shanta. 2 cost, activate main. Rest this stage, you may add 1 card from the top or bottom of your life area to your hand. Place one of your characters with a cost of 3 on top of the owner's life area face up. Trigger, play this card. I don't think anyone's running this card. I don't think anyone's got any interest in this card at all. There's maybe only one interaction where I see this card being interesting, right? So rest this stage, rip a life, put a card from your field back onto your life. So I think this is only interesting in a couple of interactions. Prometheus, Zeus, and probably Montor. Less so Montor because he makes you trash it. Because these guys have to rest themselves, right? So you might want to play one of these guys off a trigger. And then with Big Mama Shanta, take a life, put them back. And then you can get the trigger again on your def. So after you would use Prometheus, give a unit, give this like double attack or something, and then swing with it. And then afterwards, at the end of your turn, you would take the bottom card of your life, put Prometheus back on top, take the hit, set Prometheus up again, and that way you can protect Prometheus. But it's just like so many hoops to jump through for something that I think is extremely insignificant as protecting Prometheus. I feel like Prometheus and Zeus, you just want to play these guys out, use them once, and then not care about them. I don't think they're so valuable as an effect that you want to keep them around. Right? And the only time I feel like your opponent's not going to swing these things is when you're so far ahead already that they can't afford to swing these things. They have to swing like your biggest... They have to spend resources killing your biggest stuff or trying to push for lethal. So I just don't think this card has enough support around it. And it's not really healing you either. Like, you still have to take it down. So you've taken a damage. So you're at 3 life, right? You're at 3 life, right? So you set up your triggers and you put Prometheus on top. And then you take a damage. Prometheus gets played, right? Prometheus gets played. Big Mama Shanta, you want to play it back. So you take a damage and then Prometheus comes back and you're still only at 2. So it's not... And then you take damage of Prometheus. You take damage, play at Prometheus again. And then what? Big Mama Shanta. So you put him back, and then he comes back, right? Like, this is not like... I don't think you're gaining a lot off this. But, like, it's an interesting effect. But the only way I really... Like, if it healed you, I think it's totally different, right? Like, if this didn't make... This is probably, like, a really interesting card if it didn't make you rip that life already. So again, arguably there's a deck with this one, because this one heals you, right? And we're actually going to talk about that next, because we are out of cards here to talk about in the starter material. So we can actually now talk about this chick. So this is the one that comes with the OP set. This is a very interesting leader, right? So it's black and yellow, right? Interesting combination. Don 2, while attacking, rest 2, you may trash 1 card from your hand. If you have 1 or less cards in your life area, place up to 1 card from the top of your deck at the top of your life. Right. So, a lot to unpack here. So you have to attach 2 Don, which is fine because you're happy to swing for 7. 7 swings are really good in this game. But then it makes you rest 2. So it's going to cost you 4 Don every turn to use this effect. But then it also makes you trash a card from your hand. And then you get to... And then if you have 1 or less life, then you get to place the top card of your deck onto your life and go to 2 life. So for one thing, it's a really expensive effect. Now, getting down to 1 life, you are a 4 life leader. So getting down to 1 life is not an issue, right? But you don't want to sit at 1 life, 2 life even. Like you take a hit from 2, then you swing this thing for 7 Don 2, right? You go to 6. Like if you have to do this every turn just to stay at 2 life, like there's no big 6 plays in this deck. There's not a lot of game winning 6 plays in this game. So like you need to be able to like forfeit this heal effect sometimes to play one of your big bombs, right? Now like because you can't play this. This costs you 7. Yeah. And it's not like the starter deck leader where you can use this effect. So this is 2 or less, but this makes you rip a life first, right? So this leader makes you rip a life first. So you go to 2 and then you heal yourself back to 3. Sitting at 3 in this game is a really comfortable place for me. I'm really happy sitting at 3. I'm never happy sitting at 2 life, right? And then you need to be able to protect that 2 life. Because you'll have a turn where you need to protect that 2 life, because you definitely don't want to go to 1 and then spend your whole turn playing out a big guy. There is 1 unit that can justify that for like losing your whole turn while you're at 1 life. But even then, sitting at 2, you only need to take 3 hits from there. You've got no Don, you might not have Don open to protect yourself. It's Struggle Street. And then, the same time they release this card is also when they release a whole bunch of CP0 stuff that just has no synergy. OP-03 is really interesting in that it becomes very tribal, and it's a trend that seems to continue on in Set 4. Although what I really like in Set 4 is that it adds a little like backwards compatibility to some of these older decks. You know, where we're getting some of this like Baroque Works stuff and this Animal Kingdom stuff, but they're in different colors, right? But they're in different colors that specifically support a dual color version of leaders that we got in the past. So one would hope that at some stage there's going to be like some Black Big Mom related stuff coming in like, I don't know, Set 5, right? Like way later down the line. There's probably some really interesting Big Mom stuff coming right now. But because Set 3's black is so tribal, it's all this CP0, putting cards in your discard pile and then removing cards from your discard pile to gain effects, or specific cards in your discard to gain effects. Shit like this gets left behind. Cat's here. So the question sort of becomes, when you look at a card like this, you got to think about how does a leader like this want to be played. Now, if this was an all yellow leader, I have a deck in mind. Because it's a black leader, you want to get the most value out of that black stuff because you're losing 1 life. You deal yourself 1 damage at the start of your game just to have access to a whole different color. So, what kind of black stuff do you end up running? In my mind, the black stuff you're running, because there's not a lot of synergistic tools that you can use. There are some stuff in yellow that affect costs of cards, right? but not so much of it that you can go heavy into like cost reduction black stuff. In my mind, the black stuff you go for is like, it's just like black staples. You just run like some black staple cards just to supplement your game plan that's particularly rooted in yellow. Because right now this is like the blue-purple Kaido of set 3, right? You've got an interesting effect on a leader that can only really strongly utilize one of its colors. And that's what Kaido was pretty early on. So I don't see this getting any play right now, but I think if we get some Big Mom stuff in set 5, we've got a really interesting card on our hands that could have some really like playable tier 2 decks or something like that. Until then, this is kind of what we have to work with in the Big Mom stuff. But I have thought about what kind of deck we can put together now that best utilizes this effect, right? Now, I don't want to sit at 1 life and heal myself 1 every turn. But what if I could use this effect from 2 life? What if I could use this effect from 2 life is what I'm thinking about, right? And so that's when your boy Snack comes back into the picture. Haha, you didn't expect this fucking guy again, did ya? Right, so I was thinking about how to best utilize this leader, right? So you can play out Snack on turn 3, and then you can have this card at 2 life on your next swinging turn after playing this guy. So you can deal yourself 1 with Snack. Deal yourself 1 with Snack. He's an 8k banish coming at your opponent's face. They have to defend against that. And then this swings your opponent because this only costs you 1 Don, and then this is going to cost you 4 Don, right? So, and then you trash a card. But you technically draw a card when you do this. You draw a card off your life, then you heal that card back. You've drawn a card, and you haven't taken any damage, really. So, you haven't lost a card through the trash effect, and you've been able to heal that life back that you dealt yourself with this. Again, the problem is you're sitting at 2 life to do this, and it's a really dangerous way to play the game. But I think there's a really interesting archetype that revolves around this idea of card, right? And then, like, Mont'or is the same thing. I wouldn't know how you pull off Mont'or in a list like this, because it's probably better than I think. But there are other units as well. Obviously Daifuku, but Daifuku already heals you 1. This guy's effectively just swing, draw a card. But more like this Snack stuff that does deal you the 1 damage. It gets you on that 1 life threshold on your turn, not your opponent's turn. I don't think you want to go to 1 on your opponent's turn. You want to sit around 2 life, but you need to find a way to keep yourself at 2 life. And so I think the black cards, so I think you want to dig into the offensive yellow stuff and then spec into like the defensive black stuff where you can, like the Borsalinos, and then possibly some of the removal tools as well. But otherwise, that's sort of the deck I have in mind with something like this. And there are some other cards in OP-03 that have effects like this that are that do have some like potential in a deck like this. But am I saying this is a good deck? No, but I'm saying I think this is how this leader would really enjoy to be played. Right? So that's that. That's this leader. That's probably the most I can bleed out of this. Alright, let's talk about the real fucking problem child of this set. So this is Charlotte Katakuri. Now obviously there's no baseline for Green's power level, but like if there was power creep in this game, I think this is it. Don 1 when attacking, look at the top card of your life or your opponent's life, put it top or bottom. It's the same sort of effect we've already seen, and then this guy gains +1. Now, note here, there's a full stop here, right? So there's a full stop here after you check life. So if you're at no life, if you're at no life, or your opponent's at no life, he can still get the +1. It doesn't matter what he checks. He's getting the +1 after this effect. So this guy's Don 1, basically give himself 1000 power, scout for jet pistols, remove the jet pistol from the stack. This is what you're dealing with. 7 is an extremely powerful swing in this game. I've sat across from this guy, and there are decks that can definitely deal with Katakuri just fine, right? I'm not saying this guy's some unbeatable menace, right? But swinging consistently for 7 every turn, and it only costs you 1 Don is extremely powerful. That's what I am saying. And I think this guy is one of the strongest releases in this game. I think that... Ooh, I think this is a way more interesting leader, and I even think this is a way more interesting leader, even though I think this is a bad leader, and this is a good leader. I think this is a boring leader. I think this takes everything that's interesting about yellow and, like, makes it very uninteresting. And, like, I get it. From a lore standpoint, it makes sense that Katakuri is looking in the future. But, you know, if this guy had, like, there are other ways to express this. Like, if this guy was, like, rest one, check one of your opponent's cards in hand, reveal it, right? Check a card from hand, check a card from life. Like, I think we have quite an interesting unit to play with. But it seems like the outstanding part of this is not that he checks a card from life. The outstanding part of this is that he gets a bonus 1000 just for doing one Don. You compare this to something like Smoker. Again, it's a different color and different colors have different strengths. But when I think of yellow, I don't think of swing big, hit hard, right? That's not what I am immediately... Maybe I've got it wrong, right? Maybe that is what yellow's about. And yeah, I get it. Like, Katakuri's like, he's stronger than you or whatever. But there's nothing I can do as my opponent to prevent this effect from going off, like, every turn. Whereas if you play against Smoker... When you play against Smoker, you're playing a game where it's like, if I want to play my searches, I need to find a way to get rid of my searches. So he doesn't get the bonus 1000 for, like, free, right? And he doesn't get to use that if your opponent has zeros in play until he starts setting up more things, right? But there's nothing you can do about this. Your opponent, as long as they attach that one Don, they're always going to swing for 7. And your 2Ks don't prevent that. You're always going to have to pitch at least 2 cards to protect yourself against a guy like this. And, like, 4 life leaders like this will not keep up. 4 life leaders have an extremely hard time dealing with shit like this. Right? Pitching those cards, it's a tough time. Oh my god, Jesus, King Balm. It's got no counter. It's a 3 cost 5k with no counter power. And what do you pay to not have this counter power? You may trash the top or bottom card of your life. Play this guy off a trigger. So deal an extra. So this card is like deal an extra damage to yourself, and then you get a 5k on board. Don't play this. Someone better, like. I'm waiting for someone to, like, me say this card is just nonsense poo-poo, and then someone has just some crazy combo that I didn't even think of. And it's Trash a Life too, which is just insanity. There's always got to be one. Sanji, 2 cost 3k, Don 2, when attacking you may add the top or bottom card for your life, and add the top card of your deck, or add the top card of your deck to your life, right? It's Daifuku, but cheaper, and it's really good. It's really good, and it's a 2k, and there's a searcher coming up later that I'm going to talk about that can find this guy, can find either of these guys, right? But if you got this guy in your hand, turn 1, you're swinging second, you can drop this guy on 2, Don 2, if you don't have the Daifuku to play, right? You can Don this guy 2, swing, get a draw, so you threaten, you draw a card, and then you can use that, you can spend that 2 to play a blocker. If they don't have a threat that can punch this, you can block it, right? Or you can just set up the Daifuku, and then, you know, you can swing with both of these guys, draw 2 cards, whatever. Sanji's a good card. Sanji's a good card. It's a bit of a poor man's Daifuku. It's really hard to protect a 3k body, but that's fine. And so you can play this early, you can use this early, utilize this effect early to draw a card, dig deeper through your deck, or you can hold it. You can just hold it, use it later, protect yourself early, or play it early, and then use your next ones to protect yourself later. It's a good card. It's just a great card. There's always got to be one. Charlie, blocker. On play, look at the top card of your opponent's life and place it at the top or bottom of the owner's life. I don't feel like there's just like so much rampant trigger in the game that you're so worried about. Listen, most of us yellow guys are playing Katakuri. I mean, I'm playing the big mom, right? But a lot of us are playing Katakuri. So, if you're already getting that effect pretty much for free, do you really want to spend 3 to do it again, but this time you get a blocker? Yeah, it's got counter power, which is nice, but I think this could have been a whole different effect that would have been more interesting for, like, if yellow had more tools around looking at your opponent's resources and working out what your opponent's got, not just in life but in hand or the next top card of their deck, whatever, right? There's some interesting ideas around that, or even checking the next card of your own, whatever it is. But man, on play, check the top card of your opponent's life or yours, but I don't know why you ever check your own. Maybe in card, like, I just don't know what the point of it is. I feel like the only reason you play a card like this is to scout out jet pistols and then put it at the bottom of your opponent's life and then go, okay, last card's jet pistol. I'll make sure I swing with my 6k first. I don't know. I wouldn't play this. I don't know, if there was like some crazy, it's not even like Mermaid Fishman, it's just Mermaid. If there was like a Fishman Island tag on this, there might be some more interesting ideas later in the Fishman tribe, but I don't think so. Like if there comes like a yellow Jinbei leader later on, he runs Fishman stuff, maybe, but not yet. Oven, Don 1, when attacking, you may trash one card with trigger from your hand. This character gains 3,000 power for this battle. So he goes to 8 for 3, but... So like there are a lot of cards in the game that are weak and then have effects that are like, for this battle, for this turn, I gain this much power, I swing big. But they never get played. These cards consistently never get played. Because you get to use them once, and then they're not defendable. 4 is a little easy. Like, if they're just swinging you for 5, you can 2k protect stuff like cards like this. But it's never defendable cards like this. They're never defendable, and they never see play. And this guy doesn't even have the whole trigger, discard a card, play me gimmick that his brothers and sisters have. So, like, I'm not on the Oven train. Sorry. It's not my cup of tea. There's always got to be one. Charlotte Galette. There's always got to be one. It's 2-cost blocker for the deck. It's good. It'll see play. Cracker. I don't know if there's a lot to say about Cracker. So the discussion around Cracker, right? So he's a 4-cost 5k. Dom 1, when you have less life than your opponent, this guy gains double attack and plus 1,000 power. So, if you have lower life than your opponent, he's he'll hit twice for 7. And he also has the trigger effect, discard 1, you can play this guy. Probably one of the best units to get off this trigger discard player guy. Maybe there's probably a better argument to go for Perispero over this guy. With that whole... This guy does have 1,000 power though, which is doing a lot, right? This 1,000 does a lot for cards. But I see a lot of discussion around how many of this guy to run and how good this guy actually is. I think I sit more in the camp of this guy's a little bit of a bait. This 4-cost slot is really competitive in yellow, especially when you got this guy. So when I think about, does Cracker make the cut for me? Cracker's a guy that punches hard, but Cracker's not a guy that's winning the game. Cracker's a real mid-gamey tool, and I don't think you want to be fucking with a lot of mid-gamey tools. You're really happy to see this guy off an early trigger, but I'm never that happy to set this guy up off a trigger, you know what I mean? I always rather set off something else off a trigger. Like, I'm happy to set Brule up on a trigger, I'm happy to set Zeus and Prometheus on a trigger. Most of all, I want to set this, and there's another event card that I really like setting up off a trigger. So, if the first damage dealt to me, so if I'm at 5, I take a damage, it's Cracker under there, I feel like you're ecstatic, right? But if you're at 3... If you're at 3, you've set this guy up, you take the hit, you've taken the time to set this guy up and take the hit, or you play this guy for 4. I don't think he's doing a lot for you. And I think double attack without banish can be extremely overrated. So there's a lot of discussion around this guy. I honestly think he's only seeing 2 ofs. And I think if a card that you want to see off trigger is only seeing 2 ofs, then the card's not really that good. But I think some people play this guy, and I think some people probably really stand by this guy, because I reckon this guy's going to come out and win you a lot of games. But I never feel as good about playing this guy, because I'm not like about early game aggression as much as I am about early game setting up my board state, early game putting together my resources. And I think a card like Daifuku does a really good job of helping me set up my resources. So when I play this guy, he's an immediate threat, and my opponent wants to remove this guy the second he comes out, right? Which is a trait they both share. Then this guy deals 2 to my opponent, and this guy draws me a card, and maybe deals 1 to my opponent, or more commonly will attack a unit. Because this says double attack, when you use this, you want to punch face. You don't have to punch face, but you'll want to punch face. Because if you're not going to punch face, you should have just run Daifuku. Of course, he doesn't have the trigger, but just work with me here for a second. Right? You want to swing face pretty much every time you see this guy on the board, as long as you meet this condition. In the yellow mirrors is probably the hardest time to meet this condition. Right? In other matchups, probably a lot easier. But if they know you're running this guy, it's going to be one of those things where, like, you'll just throw, like, you'll show up to a big tournament, no one runs Cracker, and you'll be the guy that runs Cracker. Your opponent doesn't play around Cracker. Surprise, Cracker, 2 damage. But anyway, let me get back to my original comparison point of running these 2 guys. So they compete for the same slot, right? This guy comes out, and they're both threatening units that you want to deal with, right? So they both have that going for them. This guy's going to deal 2 damage, so this is an aggressive card, and he wants to punch face. This guy is a little bit less on the aggression, right? But he draws you a card, right? So this guy gains you 1 resource. This guy, while he deals damage to your opponent, he gives your opponent 2 resource, and sometimes off this trigger effect, he costs you 2 resource, right? Because you get that card to hand, and then you play that card, you discard another card. You're effectively trashing 2 cards to have this guy on the board. Whereas this guy, you don't get the trigger effect, but you can play him, and then he will draw his own value back if he's not dealt with. And then he has, because he's 5, he's defendable, so you can defend him. You can defend this guy too, but once you've dealt that 2 damage, you're probably not going to be able to utilize this effect again. But you will be able to utilize this effect every single turn he sticks around. The only thing between you and utilizing Daifuku's effect is, do you have 1 Don you can spend this turn to do it? Right, and if you're going on seconds, turn 8, you can use this effect, drop the 7 drop. You can do the same with this, but I just think for my style of play, Daifuku hits a hell of a lot better, because I want to build a hand state. All right, I want resources to protect myself. I don't need something like this to push more damage, because I don't think something like this wins you the game. Anyway, just as a point of comparison between 2 cards, you can decide for yourself and you can test for yourself and decide for yourself what you think is better. Probably the worst card I've ever seen. 2 cost 3k on play. Trash the top or bottom card of your life. Place 1 card from the top of your deck at the top of your life. I feel like this is a card. I don't know why this doesn't have like counter power for one thing. Like I feel like this is a card that wanted to be a 2k counter, and it's not. Because it has this just ridiculously niche effect. A common trait with these 2k cards is that they have a really niche effect. Like a really niche effect. But they're so playable purely because they have 2k counter. This has a really niche effect that I can see no situation where you really want to use it. Like, even if it was your opponent's life, it has, like, more usability. Trash the top card of your opponent's life. So then this has, and then they put the top card of their deck on their life. Then this has like really funny, really broken combos with like another card that's coming up. I guess there's one more, right, that puts like cards on top of your opponent's life, and then you trash it and then heal them 1. Like, how funny is that? How funny is that? You like put a really like powerful card on top of their deck, and then for 2 you trash it. But what does this do? On play, trash the top or bottom card of your life, and then put a card there. Like, I don't know if there are tokens coming to the game that like poison your own life. That's the only way I see a card like this making sense. No counter power. I just don't If anyone can comment and please explain to me what the point of this card is, because I feel like when I read a card like this, I'm lacking in context. Because it's not like if this dealt you the damage, you draw a card, then it's effectively 2-cost draw a card. I don't know. It's not doing anything for me. Alright, so this is another unit that I would probably want to talk about in terms of like that snack strategy that I was talking about earlier, where you deal 1 damage. Of course, this being a 4-cost sees a lot more play than Snack, who's a 5. 5 is a really weird cost in this game. This does have counter power. 4-cost 5k. When attacking, add the top or bottom card from your life to your hand. This character gains plus 2,000 power for the battle. So it's pretty good. It goes to 7. 7's a really good swing. It does deal you the 1 damage, and it does have the trigger effect of discard play this guy. I think it's playable. I think it's really playable. It does have 1k counter compared to like the Snack. And it doesn't gain a keyword like Snack gains a keyword. It just gains 2k, goes to 7, and it punches pretty good. I feel like this is the kind of thing that you would set up on your life. If you were expecting to push lethal on the following turn and you needed that extra punching power. So you would go from 2 to 1 life, trash a card, play this unit, defend that last life, and then spend that last life to gain this effect in order to push a bit more damage on lethal. You know, because you get that +2 without committing Don. You can commit that 2 Don somewhere else. So you're converting 1 card from your life into 2k from power. So there is playability here. And again, on that, like, you know, that yellow black Big Mom idea, right? When you play it with something like this, I feel like I should just keep this card open, right? If you want to play it with something like this, I think there's an interesting strategy around ripping your life and swinging big with Smoothie or swinging big with Snack, right? I think there's some interesting ideas there between these two. But in terms of, like, am I blown away by Smoothie? I'm not particularly blown away by Smoothie. I think if there were more effective ways to heal yourself in the game, that you could just consistently heal yourself, right? Instead of, you know, using Soul Pocus and the 7-drop to give your opponent the choice. But if your opponent is healing you a lot, this is a bit more playable. But if your opponent just chooses to take the damage every time, or you can't set those effects up, or your opponent's being really aggressive, Smoothie loses stocks fast, and she becomes a 1k counter. Not bad, but I'm not a huge fan. 3 for 5. There always has to be one. Pudding. This is the 1-cost searcher I was talking about. Look at top 4. So it digs 1 less than other searches we're used to. Reveal 1 Big Mom Pirates. Like every fucking yellow card in the game is Big Mom. So this has like the best hit rate of any searcher in the game, right? There's so much yellow is just Big Mom. Because, fuck man, like there's so many Big Mom Pirates characters in the anime, right? Because she's got like 100 kids. But she also finds Sanji. Like, wild. You know, if there ends up like a yellow-red deck, right, and there's like Sanji cards you want to find, and you run them in a Big Mom package, like there's more Sanji shit. But even without it, you can find that 2-cost 2k counter Sanji. So this can search out Sanji. It can also search out another 2k counter card that isn't the pudding one in the starter deck. So it's just got incredible hit rates. It's probably one of the best searches in the game. The only time you're not playing this is into Smoker. And even then, like, if you can find a way to get rid of it, like, whatever, just deal with the 7 swings every turn. It's great. It's great. Perisparrow, this fucking card sees a lot of play. 3-cost 5 with no counter. So this is the decks like, what is it? Okiku, right? Okiku and Zoro are like the 3-cost 5k units that have no counter power, but get played pretty much every time you see them. And Perispera is one of those guys too, but he also has the trigger discard. What are you doing? He also has the trigger discard play this guy. And discarding one's not that bad, because when he dies, he looks at top 3, check the top of your deck, reveal 1 Big Mom Pirates, add it to your hand. And you can defend this guy. I see people actually defend this guy, keep him around, because he's just a 5k swing every single turn. And then when he dies, he finds you he finds you like a big card that you can play in response to his death. So Perispera is like really good. He does only scry 3, but that's fine. He's really good. Everyone plays him. My only problem with Perispera in terms of... So I don't actually run Perispera. As much as I'm gas bagging this guy up, I don't actually run him. And the reason I don't run him is because I run a very greedy list in yellow. So I'm running like 4 Soul Pocus, 4 Katakuri when we're going to talk about him, and 4 like 2 7-drop Big Moms, 4 10-drop Big Moms. So to have like 4 of this guy in the deck as well, man, like lacking on that counter power, something had to give. And I think for me, my choice was Perispera there, because I just wanted to drop big bombs and set up like Soul Pocuses and things. But like in the Katakuri list, hey, you got a real winner here. And this is the 10-drop I just mentioned. Resident 10-drop of yellow. It's a 12k, so it's extremely large. 10 cost. So it combines that Soul Pocus effect. You heal 1 and you trash 1 from your opponent. Now the difference between this and the other 2 versions of this effect, this has to be Big Mom Pirates type. So you can't. There's like an Arlong. There's like an Arlong card that I didn't talk about, that I forgot was in the set. You can't play this in Arlong. It's really strong. It's really strong. Again, 10 costs, 9 costs. They do have that problem of if you play them at the wrong time, you just lose the game. So you have to be pretty smart. You have to be relatively smart about when you drop this thing. The thing is, because you're spending so many turns, in the deck I play anyway, you spend so many turns setting up Soul Pocuses and the 7-drop. You might heal a couple cards before then. Sometimes you play this from 3 life and your opponent's just molding. And then there's this huge thing that doesn't go away that's really hard to deal with. Like, we have to wait till set 4 before, like... I feel bad for a color like blue, man. Blue's got no way to deal with shit like this. So they have to wait till, like, set 4 when they get Red Rock and stuff. Like, this thing is really hard to get rid of. Even black has to commit a lot of resources to try and remove this thing. Purple's only got the 10-drop that's going to wipe the board, right? So everything that can remove this struggles to remove this, has to jump through hoops to remove this. There's drawbacks to removing this, and then it's got a really powerful effect. And, you know, if you want to run a list that's got, like, the Zeus and the Prometheus, then at 12k double strike banish... They're not, like, they want to have blockers set up for this guy. So yeah, it's a really powerful effect. It denies your opponent 1 resource and it gains you 1 defense. Kind of like what Whitebeard does. Except Whitebeard's is on swing. This is on play. And I mean, it's 1 cost more, so like, it should be good. It should be good. And it is. This card, 1 cost 1k, you may trash 1 card with trigger from your hand, KO one of your opponent's characters would cost 1 or less. So, as far as non-play effect goes, it's pretty funny into the Zoro matchup. Of course, you do have to discard for it, which does end up making it a little bit expensive. But outside the matchups where you're trying to deal with like all these multiple 1 cost units, where this does become playable, 2k, has 2k. It's Big Mom Pirates. It's searchable by your Big Mom Searcher pudding. So Struzen actually becomes a pretty good card. It has a very niche effect, but it's 2k and it's searchable, so it's very playable. It's very good for your deck. Shirahoshi. So you can set up Shirahoshi. I feel like it's way too late in the game. I feel like 3 life is not a place where I really want to be setting up Shirahoshi, but draw 3. Trash 2 is probably pretty good. Even because it has trigger, right? Even playing it at 5 might not even be that bad. Does have 1k. I don't really run Shirahoshi, but I could see why people would run Shirahoshi. I haven't really done a lot of testing with this card, but I don't think there's much to say about this that's interesting. Napoleon! So, he's Zeus and Prometheus, but in bad form. 3 costs 3k, he has 1k counter, trigger, play this card, activate main, rest this guy, and your leader or one of your Charlotte Linlin characters gains +1 power until the start of your next turn. So, he does turn Big Mom into a 6k. Sorry, buddy, my leg is falling asleep. Oh, fuck. Sorry. I had my leg up, and it was like, I was like hyperextending my knee, so my shit like fell asleep, and my heel hurts, and, right, so, makes you 6k, like, you don't want to spend 3 to stay at 6k, I don't think. And the great irony is you play this thing, and then your opponent just punches it. They just spend that turn. So, like, the only way I see this being, like, funny is that, yeah, it makes your leader 6k, but that's not the fun effect. It just baits your opponent into, like, fighting this thing, and it becomes, like, a free block off the trigger, like a pseudo blocker. It kind of reminds me of playing against green players who will spend resources resting my blocker and then swinging my blocker with their leader, which effectively just forced me to block that turn. It's like, alright, I don't get to do that later, but it's just not that valuable. So that's where this card is funny off the trigger, not on the actual playing. But yeah, otherwise I don't see anything interesting about this. Maybe in the Whitebeard matchup. Obviously swinging for 7, like, so maybe against Katakuri it's got some like interesting use cases. But to play this consistently, I mean, they're just gonna swing this and punch this the turn after you rest it. And like, where you're gonna Big Mama Shantor, put this back on your life, keep replaying it, keep resting it, being a 6k all the time. I don't think that's a good use of your triggers. Good use of setting your triggers. But like, whatever. You pull this off 5, you rest it, you become a 6, you swing for 6, then they punch it back and it dies. I don't know, like, it's a free 1k off your life if you just got it off random. But I don't see me playing this ever. Ikuku, sobering into 2. Whatever this says. 2 cost, counter up to one of your leader or characters gains +5 for the battle. Trigger, you may discard 2 to heal 1. I don't like the trigger. I wouldn't set the trigger up. So like, the trigger is not bad if you want to think of it in terms of, I can discard 2 cards of 1k power each to go to 7 and block a 6k swing. Or I can take damage from something that's 8. Discard those 2 1ks, or events, or whatever they are. So, if I didn't have the ability to... If it was going to cost me more than 2 cards to defend against an attack anyway, and then I pulled this trigger, and then I discarded those 2 cards that I might have been able to use to heal myself 1, it's an interesting use case. But, like, again, I'd just rather put Soul Pocus in my life. I'd rather put, like, there's one coming up here, right, that I'd rather put in my life. This is not really the card that I'm interested in putting in my life. The other thing about yellow is that I've had a really hard time in yellow keeping Don open for counters. To the point where, and I guess, like, it doesn't make sense if I say, like, I just rather spend the 2 Don to play out blockers, because then why would I just not use that 2 Don to keep something like this opening? Now, the interesting thing here is it goes to 5 instead of 4, which makes this a really powerful counter for that 2 cost, but it doesn't have, like, an extra effect, you know, like Thunder Bagua, like, it gives you an extra Don, right, and, like, Red Hawk will KO a dude, and things like that. There's always extra effects tied to these counters. Impact Wave will blow up a blocker. There's a lot of use cases with cards like those where I think I will block with the counter that's quite inefficient. So I will block a 6k swing with a counter that brings me up to 9k, purely just to get that impact wave, blow up the blocker so I have a really good swing next turn, or gain that extra Don so I can go to 10, so I can play the 10 drop Kaido, things like that. This doesn't have use cases. This is purely I'm going to set this up to defend myself against a massive swing that I can't combo out of anyway. Or I'm going to counter for 5. I don't know. Like, you be the judge. I'm not running this card. Are you running this card? And why are you running this card? Why do you think this is good? And I think this is poo-poo. 2 cost Buzzcut Mochi. If you have less life than your opponent capped, one of your opponent's characters costs 4 or less. Trigger, play 1 character with a cost of 4 or less with trigger from your hand. So, it's another one of those, like, main has a pretty decent effect, and even at 2, less life than your opponent, all meetable conditions, but you're never happy. Like, event cards just have a really hard time seeing play, and, you know, when I have units that have powerful effects that I want to put on the board, it makes cards like this so much harder to use. The trigger is honestly not bad. Setting up this trigger, and then being able to play like a Smoothie, or you can't play Daifuku. Smoothie, I guess, is like the main one. There are some other like 4-drops with trigger, I'm pretty sure. You can play Perispero with this and not have to discard. And that makes this interesting, where as like something you would want to set up. But, you know, I'm not running this at more than 2 of, even though it is quite a powerful effect. You know, KOing at 4 costs for only 2 is pretty good. You do have to be quite low on life, though. I misread this when I first read this, and I put like 4 of these in my deck. 3 costs. If your opponent has 4 or more life cards, place up to 1 card from the top of your opponent's life in the trash. I thought this was 3-drop, just trash one of your opponent's life. Activate main, trash one of your trigger, trash one of your opponent's life. I didn't read this whole first line of if your opponent has 4 or more life cards, right? At best, you can get 2. You can use this twice. If you're going first, you can play this and then swing, right? And so your opponent, like, if your opponent goes, or you can swing for 5. Maybe they'll block out of it. Maybe they won't. Some people do block at 5. Some decks don't block at 5. Cards like red that just want to like amass resources and want to outrace you, so they don't care about their life total. They're not going to block. But like, there are blue decks. A lot of people playing blue correctly will block out. And it trashes, so it's quite funny. I think this is a funny card, and I think there's interesting use cases with this card. You know, trashing your opponent's life twice to get them to 3, but it just seems real. It seems like a really slow thing to do. You're not punching your opponent early, where you want to get those early chips in, because by the time you get to like your 2nd, 3rd swing against your opponent, they have units on board that you want to start punch fighting. So I don't know. A card like this is funny, but it also prevents you from fighting your opponent's life, because you get too tunnel visioned on using this effect and getting the most out of it. But I think it's a funny card. I've used it before. This is a great card. 2 cost main. You may trash the top card of your life. KO one of your opponent's cards will cost 5 or less. Trigger, KO a guy at 5 or less. So on trigger, you don't need to trash the life. It effectively is its own trash off the trigger, if you want to think about it that way. KO 5 or less. KOing 5s is really good. A lot of really good 5s. 5s are pretty like high range for like mid-strength units. It has a lot of coverage for things that you want to blow up. You can set this thing up. If you're expecting a guy to come out, you can set this thing up. Your opponent swings you. If they get their order wrong, they play a 5-cost dude for the effect and then swing with their leader, and then you pop the guy. It's just like, it feels so rewarding to do. Hello. It feels really rewarding to set a card like this up and use it, and I will do it. But having said that, I only run 2 of these, and I never use the activate main. But like, this is what is interesting about yellow. When you have niche card, not niche, right? Like, this is pretty niche. But when you have cards like this, and this, and this, not so much that, or even this, right? That you can set up in your life, and they have very specific use cases. They feel very rewarding to use, and it takes away the element of yellow and event cards just being like, it takes away the whole thing of like event cards just bricking you in a lot of ways. So I really like Thunderbolt, and I see a lot of people run Thunderbolt, and for pretty good reason. I think this is a pretty mad card, and I think this is a very rewarding card to pull from your life if you've set it up. And I think it's a very frustrating card for your opponent to pull out of life when they're playing Katakuri. So there's that. This guy. When I first saw this guy, I thought this was the most bullshit card I've ever seen. 8 cost, 8k on play, put an 8 cost on top or bottom of owner's life, face up. I thought this was the most bullshit card I've ever seen when I first saw it, until I read the fine print. So, if you want to think about this card in terms of it's an 8 cost and it can remove an 8 cost, then you have one of the most overpowered cards in the game, arguably. Or you have some mad power creep. But if you want to look at it in terms of 8 cost, heal your opponent 1, then it becomes a lot, it loses a lot of stocks in your mind. Now, it's a great card, don't get me wrong. It hits 8s. Hitting 8s in this game is so good. Hitting set 2, right? Odin in green is a real big menace of a unit. It's an 8 cost. You KO it. They play Okiku. Then they fucking play another Odin and shit like that. There's a lot of value in a card like that. But this, by putting it in the opponent's life, it removes access to that card for a few turns. Possibly for the rest of the game. If you put this at bottom, or you put this at top and then trash it with the Big Mom effect, which is a very funny combination. A very rewarding combination to do. Even though it's 18 mana to put an 8 cost card in the trash. In black, hey, there's this guy again. In black, you can reduce a 10 cost to 8. And hey, this guy gives you access to black, right? And then you can do that again. But yeah, you will notice a lot in this game. With a lot of KO effect cards, things like that. Anything that can KO something of equal or greater size than itself, it has a drawback. And the drawback in this case is you heal your opponent 1. So don't forget, when you play this card, you are removing a unit, but you are also healing your opponent 1. Which, it's great. You remove that unit, you disrupt their tempo, but you've also made them a little bit more defensive. So you can't play this guy bounce a blocker, right? So the only thing that's similar to this is the Blue Dofi, which comes out and puts a 7 back to your opponent's hand. But they can play that card again. But that card can only hit... It's a 7 that hits 7. This is an 8 that hits 8s. So yeah, by virtue of it hitting an 8, it's a really good card. But just remember the silver lining. It heals your opponent 1, right? So that's where it's not quite so good, right? But very rewarding to play this. Put something at the bottom of the deck or top of the deck. And then on the following turn, immediately drop this. And remove it. Ishio, in black, Fujitora seems to be a really big bomb in black right now. That's if he doesn't fucking discard your Katakuri, right, and your Big Mom. So you can search these guys out, set your hand up, have these 2 guys in hand. Make sure on turn 8 you have 5 cards in hand, not 6 cards in hand, or else you're going to be so pissed when they discard this and the Big Mom. Drop this on, you swing a little bit on 8. Right? And then you drop this guy for 8, put the Fujitora back on top of the deck, or whatever card it is, then play Big Mom, and trash that card, right? And now you've got 2 really potent attackers on the board, you've healed yourself 1, and you have removed that card. So across 2 turns, you've removed a really powerful unit, it's gone straight to the trash. If it had an on-KO effect, it doesn't get to be used now, and you end up with an 8k and a 12k on the board. Even the 7k, even the 7-drop Big Mom can fill an effect like that, or Soul Focus, but quite often they'll probably just end up healing you instead in hopes that they will get that card back and be able to play that card. And it can put you in a lot of situations where you end up baiting your opponent into taking suboptimal plays because they're like, fuck, I need that card, I need to get that card back, right? Especially in that Fujitora case, right? You put that Fujitora back, you can go back to 6, 7 cards, whatever, comfortably. And your opponent's like, well, when I play that Fujitora again, you're going to be pretty mad. And then you trash it, and then they're pretty mad. Or you put it on bottom, and then it's too late for them to play anyway. That's the other thing. You can just, instead of trying to set up this whole big elaborate thing where you trash it with this, you can just pull this out, put the card on bottom, and if it's a big unit, like a big 8-drop unit, they're probably not going to play it from 0 life. Guarantee you that. They have to have a very comfortable board full of blockers, and they have to have removed like this guy and all that. So yeah, it's a really good card. That's all the OP-03 stuff. The only real other things to talk about is like this Yamato shit. And I haven't really spent a lot of time looking at it. I don't really know what there is worth to talk about in the Yamato stuff. Egg is very interested in Yamato as a leader. I think this is coming more towards the end of set 3. But this is Don 1 on your opponent's turn. While your life is 2 or less, this becomes a 6k. So this unit's whole gimmick is from 2 life or less with 1 Don attached, it's Whitebeard. I mean, everyone's 1 Don attached with Whitebeard, but now this is 1 Don. This like keeps that 1 Don power bonus on your opponent's turn. That's the gimmick. Now, because swinging for 7s is so powerful in this game, this is arguably a pretty good effect. Because your 2Ks gain so much more value against these 7k swings. My only thing with this Yamato, so I feel like, for me, this is kind of like it's kind of like the leader you would play in yellow if there just wasn't a synergistic fit for a leader, right? So if you want to think, if you want to think about, like, if these were the only 2 leaders we had in yellow, right? If these were the only 2 leaders we had in yellow, or hell, if you want to make it 3, right? If these were the only leaders we had in yellow, then, like, this is very synergistic, this is very synergistic, and only 4 cost. I did the thing where I lost all my stuff. Right. This is very synergistic, right? You want to set triggers and do a whole bunch of bullshit to make sure that this works. You're going to sit at 3 life, but you're setting triggers. If you're not running a deck like that, it makes no sense to use this leader, right? So maybe you would run a yellow deck that runs Yamato instead, because it has a very generic effect that works with pretty much any combination of cards. This is very low synergistic, which is good for like new players and stuff like that. People are trying to get into the game, learn the game. You don't want you don't want to put them on like crazy starter deck leaders like this fucking Charlotte Linlin, which is a lot for a new player to wrap their head around. But this is not a lot for a new player to wrap their head around. This is a very simple effect to understand. Now, my only problem with this as the everyman leader for yellow is that yellow already has an everyman leader. Hello, it's this guy again. I feel like there aren't a lot of situations where you would weigh up the cost of these 2 leaders and go, yeah, Yamato is probably going to be better. Because the thing is, for something that probably should, like, this leader is not a high synergy leader like the Big Mom leaders are. So we end up with 2 low synergy leaders and 2 high synergy leaders, right? And the question becomes, which leader do you want to play, right? Do you want to play a high synergy leader that requires a specific deck, or do you want to play a low synergy leader that can run just generically strong cards and punch out your opponent, right? So if you lean in this direction, you have 2 leaders to pick from. Do you want to pick something that is more defensive from 2 life, or do you want to pick something that is just way more aggressive? Well, there's your way up here. My thing is that for 1 Don, this guy's going to swing 7. For 1 Don, this guy's going to swing 6, but is a little bit more defensible when you get to 2 life. And you're a little bit more defensible from 2 life. I don't look at yellow and think yellow is an extremely defensible color in that it has the best counters or that it has the best blockers or anything like that. By all means, I don't. There's interesting defense with something like this by setting up your triggers and screwing over your opponent in a more control-focused manner. But like being 6 in yellow, I don't know if it has that much value. Because when I play a leader like this, which is high synergy, right? And I'm setting up effects to heal myself and to get a blocker off the top of my life and play out a lot of units really quickly. That means I have a lot of targets for my opponent to fight, and then I drop a 10k that heals me 1, deals them 1. That's how I'm defending myself with a leader like this, right? And Katakuri defends himself by punching the opponent really hard, so they have fewer resources to fight back. And then he does have access to the 10 drop, right? And the 7 drop. So he's punching you so hard and so fast that you have to start spending, you have to spend resources to protect yourself. And then when they use Soul Pocus, if he's running Soul Pocus or the 7 drop, you have to opt for the heal option. He has to opt for the heal option as opposed to the trash 1 option, right? So that's how this guy ends up defending himself, by healing 1. So then I look at these two and I think, right, these two fill a very similar role of just being in decks with very generic cards. Difference being this guy has access to like Big Mom stuff and this guy has access to Land of Wano stuff. So in OP-03 right now, where our cards are mainly Big Mom stuff, right? We have 2 very generic leaders that have very generic effects, and you can just play with yellow's power cards, right? Which one do you want? You take your pick. Now, of course, Yamato does come with a range of starter cards. So this guy, 4 costs, 5k. So this is where the interesting stuff in this starter deck comes in. Trigger, rest one of your opponent's characters with the cost of 2 or less, and then this guy comes to your hand. So off the trigger, he has a pretty interesting effect, and then he comes to your hand, right? 2 or less, not a lot of good range, but it's whatever. This is more interesting if it has access to green cards, right? But it doesn't. And I think that's a real issue. If you had a way to put this guy back on top of your life, I think there's more interesting ideas behind it, but there isn't. Ulti, 4 for 6. There has to be one. Kaido, 2 or less. This guy cannot be KO'd. That's the gimmick. I don't know. Or he has to have 1 Don attached, right? And it's in battle, so you can still like jet pistol this guy, whatever you want to do. But as far as a punch fighter goes, he's alright. He's very hard to get rid of. He sits at 2. But I feel like if you're sitting at 2, your opponent's just punching your life. They can just ignore this a lot of the time. Use a skill card if they have to remove this. Kozuki Oden, 7 for 7. Don 1, this character gains double attack. On KO, you may trash 2 cards from your hand, add 1 card from the top of your deck to your life. I just don't like having to trash 2 cards to get this effect. Double attack's pretty good. The green one stands himself. This guy sort of just hits twice in the 1 attack. He is cheaper. He's a big guy. I don't know, I don't feel like there's a lot to say about a unit like this. I guess it would put out a lot of pressure. It is only 7k power though, which is good, but not on your late game bodies. 2 for 4, there has to be one. Shinobu, I don't remember this being good. Oh yeah, it's got no counter power. 3 for 2, it's a blocker. On block, you may add 1 card from the top or bottom of your life to your hand. This guy gains +4. So, you can block with this guy, take a damage, and then this unit will hang around for your next block, where you will take another damage, or just KO it. Why wouldn't you just take the damage? I just don't maybe there's something I'm missing, there's some use cases, but I'm not on board. I remember this guy being alright. 5 for 6, no counter. Don 1, when attacking, you may add the top or bottom card from your life to your hand. Play 1 yellow, Land of Wano type character with a cost of 4 or less from your hand. So, it's kind of like that Kinemon from set 1. So just saying that probably doesn't make it sound like it's a particularly good card. But, Don 1, swings for 7, you rip a life, and then you get to play a 4 or less. Man, I feel like there needs to be a yellow-green Land of Wano, and then we have an interesting deck to play. I just don't think these cards are really quite there. Again, if you had a really consistent way to heal yourself, this might be another, maybe, I don't know. Similar effect we looked at before. 3 for 4. Trigger. KO one of your opponents with a cost of 1 or less. Add this card to your hand. It's niche. KOing ones is like, it's good against Zoro. Like, you're always happy to like take something from your life and then KO like one of Zoro's dudes, and this guy comes to your hand so you can counter with it. If this was a 2k counter, you've got like a great card, right? That's not like that I don't even think is like overpowered or anything. Like, it comes off as a trigger. You can't set your triggers with this Land of Wano leader. So you're lucky to like pull this, and then it's a 2k counter. There's an interesting use case there, and it just fools around with Zoro. And even if this was like too strong with like a big mom that can set her own life. Again, we can't patch cards obviously, but you're in playtesting. You could change this to like, if your leader is Land of Wano, right? KO one of your opponent's characters, cost 1 or less. But, you know, you take a swing from Zoro, take the hit, pull this out, it bombs like Sunny-kun or whatever, you're pretty happy. Ace-kun. Another one of these funny, take a life so you can keep your unit around. I think it's better. I think it's a lot better in this case. 6 for 7, once per turn. If this guy would be KO'd, you can trash a card from your life instead. So it's really just, do you want to be aggressive? You want to be aggressive? Take the life instead of letting this guy die. And then he's swinging for 7. So I see you only doing this once per game, and that's the case of, I'm going to take the damage here instead of losing the guy, or I'll aggressively take damage in a turn. It's once per turn, right? So you can only do it once. I will take the damage to my life to keep this guy on the board, which is relevant. I think that's very relevant in a lot of times for an offensive unit. Not for fucking Shinobu, dude. Like, what is this card, man? Why does this not have counter power? I look at a card like this and I think it should have 2k power. They opted not to put counter power on this, and I'm thinking if this has 2k power, I might play it. But because it doesn't, I don't think I will ever play this card. Rip a life to keep a blocker, to make my blocker 6k. Not my cup of tea. But I think this is definitely playable. Luffy, 3 for 5. There had to be one. Yamato, 3 for 3. This is our 2k. You may add the top or bottom card of your life to your hand. This character gains +2 until the start of the next turn. Alright, because it's 2k, it's playable, but as a unit to play out, there might be some like offensive use cases where this is quite useful. But again, there's so many of these cards that are just really like weak, but they gain power for an... it is start of next turn though. Okay, so since it's start of next turn, it's a lot more interesting as a unit. Okay, I think this is a lot more interesting as a unit. So I think, but yeah, like those cards that are like gain power and then like they just get swung on the following turn. I guess like ripping the top or bottom card from your life, you would only do that once, right? So this is arguably quite a useful. This is arguably sometimes a very useful effect. And when it isn't a useful effect, it's a +2 counter. 5 for 7, there had to be one. Cool, we have some events. So this is a 1-cost counter. If you have 2 or less cards in your life area, you have to your opponent, one of your opponent or your opponent's characters -3,000. Okay, so it's a reverse ballpoint. So it's ballpoint. It's like a 3,000 defense, but it like minuses power. If there was like counters that you could combo in, like that you could combo on top of this, that was like Red Hawk, where you could bomb guys that have like, I think it's 4,000 power or whatever off. It's off trigger, right? But I think it's off the count. Anyway, whatever it is, like then it has specific use cases. But how it is like this, it's kind of just ballpoint. But it does have a trigger. You may trash 2 cards from your hand. Okay, so it's this whole idea again. Again, I'm not like I see where it's useful, but I'm not like a huge fan. But considering it's a 1 for 3, I think it's quite a lot more useful than the other one that I was talking about. I don't know the name, Ikoku Sovereignty. I think this becomes a lot more useful. Keeping one open is a pretty easy thing to do. 3,000. You're at 6. You're a 6k leader, so it becomes an effective 4k counter if you want to think about it that way. I think this is a lot more playable than it is to set as a trigger. But again, like if you can't defend, again, you can't set your life though. Like if you know this is sitting on top of your life and your opponent swings you for like 10, and you can't combo out of a 10, right? But you take the damage and then discard 2 cards, you've effectively gone from 6 to 8 to block 10. Like, if you want to think about it in that terminology, then like it's a good trigger, but it's too niche. But I think this counter on its own in this leader is pretty good. Then it goes from being a ballpoint at 2 or less life to a radical beam at 2 or less life with this leader specifically. Anyway, if you want to think about it in that terminology. Thunder Bagua in yellow. So I did read this card. It's kind of like Purple's Thunder Bagua, but yellow themed. And I'll tell you how. 2 cost. Very similar artwork, right? Counter. Up to one of your leader or characters gains +4 during this battle. Same as Purple's Thunder Bagua. Then if you have 2 or less life cards in your life area, same as Purple's Thunder Bagua. Place up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 3 or less face down on the top or bottom of your opponent's life. This is an interesting card. This is a way more interesting card if we had ways to reduce power on the opponent's turn, which right now we do not, right? Because imagine if the 10-drop secret rare from set 2 worked on your opponent's turn. Hey, we've got a combo. We've got a funny combo where we can use this for 2 and then like put, how broken is that? Put 8Ks on your opponent's life. So the caveat here is that you can block the attack and you can remove a card, but you heal your opponent 1. Now, let me ask you, in how many cases, other than like, Zorro, and even then, is healing your opponent 1 by putting a 3 or less face down on the top or bottom of their life, how often are you happy to do that? That's a question I want you to walk away with and ask yourself at home. But yeah, yellow themed. Trigger, draw 1 card. Great trigger. Can't argue with that trigger. Think of it in this term. Think of it in this kind of terminology. Wouldn't you rather keep the card for counter? Say you pulled this card off your life, and on your following turn you're going to play a 10-drop, right? And or you've added up your Don for your next turn. You're going to spend all your Don. You're not going to play this next turn. Maybe just draw the card, right? Think about your future turns. If you don't see yourself being able to hold the 2 open, sometimes it's better to draw the card. Alright? That's the times when I see I'm playing a trigger. Otherwise, that's it. There's no more yellow cards. That's it. That's all I wanted to talk about. So, yeah, let me know what you think. I think there's some pretty interesting stuff in yellow, and I also think there's a lot of disappointing stuff in yellow when I want to think about like Katakuri. And even not so much Yamato. I think Yamato I would have been a hell of a lot more interested in if there wasn't Katakuri. I think Katakuri is too much of an everyman in yellow. You just run him with all the generically strong yellow cards. Or if you want an experience that feels a little bit more strategic and a little bit more fulfilling, you go for that Big Mom and you can start setting triggers and doing more fun and interesting things. Or if you just want to win, hey, that Katakuri option's always there. So anyway, that's the video. I'm going to go take a shit. Bye-bye.